Geology, geology, geology. Welcome everybody to the Mini Geology radio show. This is Daniel Minisini, your inquisitive geologist. And with us today, Kayla Iacovino, an experimental petrologist working for Jacobs, a service provider for the NASA Johnson Space Center. So she's in Houston. We are in Houston as well. But we can't do this interview face-to-face because of the coronavirus crisis that we're undergoing. So Kayla has several other roles, not only this one of experimental petrologist. And I hope she'll explain it. But Kayla, one of her roles that I really like is that she has an extensive media experience, and she's a powerful new hybrid between a scientist and a media communicator. So today we're going to know her better, and we're going to ask her some secrets to communicate better our beloved science. Kayla, very welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daniel.
Kayla, let's start asking you something as simple as describing yourself. How would you describe yourself?
Well, to start out, on the professional side of things, as you said, I'm an experimental petrologist. And what that means is that, petrologist is someone, I don't study oil, even though I'm here in Houston, I get that a lot. A petrologist, the word actually comes from petra, the Greek word for rock, and ologist, the person who studies rocks. But specifically, petrology is the study of the origins of rocks. And so I'm interested in understanding where rocks come from and how they're created inside of the Earth and other planets. The experimentalist part of that means that I get to do that kind of stuff in the lab. So we have equipment in our laboratory that recreates the conditions, the extreme conditions inside of planets. So really high pressures, really high temperatures, and we create magmas. We create basically miniature magma chambers in our lab to study how rocks are born all over the solar system.
What about yourself? Let us know something about yourself, Kayla. Which kind of person are you?
Yeah, so I would say I'm an inquisitive person. I'm an ambitious person. I'm always trying to learn something new. I'm a huge Trekkie, Star Trek fan. It's a big part of my life and always has been. It's a big reason why I was led down a scientific path early in my life. I love traveling, meeting new people. That's one of my favorite things about my job. I do a lot of travel, a lot of field work. And not only do I get to do cool science and see cool rocks and see cool things, but I get to meet and interact with the people who live on these volcanoes that I'm studying. Volcanoes are my specialty. And like learning from, we're back in either our ivory towers or our laboratories, and we're studying these rocks on a very intellectual, removed emotionally sometimes level. But these people are living with this geology every day. It's part of their life. It shapes the way that they live.
What about your role in the website Trek Movies?
Yeah, so I mentioned I'm a Trekkie, and I help run the #1 fan-run Star Trek website. It's trekmovie.com. I'm also a co-host of our podcast called The Shuttle Pod, and we release a podcast every couple of weeks. Yeah, it's a huge website. It's been growing since its inception, 2006, 2007.
So how much time does it take this project?
It ebbs and flows. We have a lot of people. It's all volunteers. It's not a moneymaker. It's really a passion project. We're all love Trekkies. We like writing. We like reporting. It depends. Sometimes it can be all consuming. I try not to let it be. I can't because I have a full-time job and I'm working and doing other projects outside of that job. So, but like doing the podcast alone, we record, maybe takes an hour, 1 to 2 hours to record a show every couple weeks, and then we have to edit it, and then we have to write the copy to go with the story that gets posted. So even just the podcast alone can take several hours a week.
Is there any connection between this project and your work as a petrologist?
Oh, I think definitely so. I think the #1 thing is storytelling. So one of the most important roles of my job is storytelling. Is, I do all the science, but how do we communicate it with others? And that's on every level. So from the general public to a classroom full of students to a paper, a manuscript we might write in a professional journal. And in every one of those cases, we have to tell a story. And the way you get good at that, the way you get good at writing and storytelling is by practicing. And so doing the podcast, writing articles for the website, even if they're small, just constantly working that muscle, that creative storytelling muscle, I think is really, really helpful and you also see how to put a project together, right? You have goals, you make an outline, you organize it, you do it, you adjust things on the fly. And that all applies to the work that we do.
Where do you learn the storytelling techniques and methods?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say any formal training in storytelling. I had a brief stint before I started my geology career. I did one semester in college as a film major because I thought I would want to do that because storytelling has always been really interesting to me. So it's an interest that I've had, but I think honestly it's just doing it, just practicing over and over and reading a lot. So the more you read, you see that the techniques that people are using, even if they're unconsciously using these storytelling techniques.
What do you read, Kyla?
Everything from, I read a lot of sort of popular science, like, sort of blogs on, what new science things are happening. Because I can't go read a medical journal, but I can read someone's interpretation of that for the public. So I read a lot of those. And a lot of, I read some, like for my private, just fun reading, read some like political type books with the recent goings on, surrounding the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests and this whole movement. I've been looking for more books to read. I've started reading an excellent book called The End to Policing. And it talks about the history of police and just, what role they play in our society. So, I mean, anything you read, if you're into science fiction, fantasy, if you're into history, if you like reading the newspaper, like honestly, any of that is storytelling. Watching TV, watching movies. That's, I watch movies and I think, oh, how did they put these scenes together? I try to put myself in the director's shoes or in the writer's shoes and say, how did they decide this should happen then? Oh, wow, and then they revealed this thing. You can do that in your science too.
And Kayla, you also do many other things for outreach. So you're a petrologist working at NASA. Then you are working with the Trek movie website. And then you spotty maybe, not constantly, but you appear several times in very important outlets. Do you want to talk about that and how often do you do that?
Sure. Yeah, so I've worked with a number of folks in all kinds of media, so things like newspapers, magazines, and also documentaries. I filmed a number of documentaries. And that, it's funny, it was kind of opportunistic. I didn't necessarily seek that out. It was always something that I would have been interested in, but I didn't pound the pavement and go to people and say, I want to work in your movie or anything like that. It sort of came to me. And I think when people ask how to get into that, just the only advice I can give is from my story, which is that I put myself out there early on. So one of the main ways that people have found me is through my website. So I have a website. It's my name, KaylaIacovino.com.
How do they find you?
Well, I think that I have a couple of things working for me. So I have this website. I have like my Twitter account. I have the Trek movie website. So my name is on the internet. And also my name is very Googleable. So I may be the only person named Kayla Iacovino in the world. It's possible. There's plenty of Iacovinos in Italy, but I don't know that any of them are named Kayla. It's not a very Italian name.
What does it mean, Kayla?
So it's a first name. It's more and more common all the time in the U.S. But my name comes from my mother's side of the family. So my mother's last name is Kayla, and her ancestors, I'm not sure at which level, when they came to the U.S., their name was Kayla, but it was spelled differently. I think it was Cejla. It was like Bohemian, but they changed it to Kayla to sound more American. And so because there's this female named Kayla that matches that name, that's why my parents gave me that name.
And Kyla, tell us a little bit more about what's the history behind your deep embedment into the mass media. You said that they just come to you, that your name and last name are Googleable, and I don't think it's so easy. Tell us more about it.
I mean, I think that's the way it started. And I think it's very much like one thing leads to another. So, for example, my documentary work, once I did one, then my name was on someone's list for probably female volcanologist lady or something, something that was unique about me. And that was with radio too. Some of the first things I ever did in the media was with radio. It's actually kind of a funny story of how I got into that. So I was on Science Friday a number of times with Ira Flato, which is a program that I absolutely love on NPR. And I must have been an undergrad when I first started doing that. I was very young. And it's because of my connection with Star Trek. So I was writing for this website, trekmovie.com, and we used to do weekly columns on different topics. And we had a Thursday comics day and whatever. And we also had a Science Friday. And I was the science writer at the time for the website. And every Friday I would write about some recent findings in science. And we didn't set out to steal that name, although we probably should have thought of it. It was just honestly because we did science stuff on Friday and it was our Science Friday. And we actually they reached out to us. Science Friday reached out to us and said, hey guys, like your website's cool and all, but you got to stop using that name. Like that's our name, it's trademarked. They were nice about it. And we're like, oh, wow, we're so sorry. We'll do Science Saturday or something. And I think Ira Flato must have Googled me or something or looked at my Facebook and saw that I was studying Antarctica. And that's what I studied for my PhD later on. And he loved Antarctica. He'd been there once or twice, maybe. I think that caught his eye and said, hey, here's this scientist. She's studying Antarctica. Maybe she would like to come on the show. And something, I don't know what it was that made him think that exactly, but he basically said like, hey, this is really interesting what you're doing. We would love to have you on the show. We have a slot on like our New Year's Eve show. And we were going to do like a science from the ends of the earth show. And I was going to be going to Antarctica like that at that time. And he's like, you could call in from sat phone. And so I called into NPR on the satellite phone, standing outside of our hut in Antarctica on the side of a volcano, and was like on the radio. And from then they called me up a couple times after that. They some of the other NPR shows got in touch, and then from there people started writing things about what I had done on radio, and then more of the sort of the written medium came into play, and eventually TV as well.
You don't mention it, but you have been involved with projects with CNN, with BBC, New York Times, and many others. You have been interviewed several times. Do you have a message in your mind that you, beforehand, you think about it? What's going to be your message when you're interviewed? What do you want to convey to the audience that you have in front of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a few things that I do keep sort of in my pocket. One of them I already mentioned. In fact, it's this idea of the human connection to what we do. I think a lot of people resonate with the message of a human connection. People like to see stories about people, and that helps them put themselves in the shoes of sort of what you're doing.
But you study the rocks. How can you tell stories about the people?
So I'll give you an example of a documentary I worked on with the BBC, which was in the DR Congo on a couple of volcanoes called Nyiragongo and Nyamulilgira. Nyiragongo is this massive, imposing volcano. It has a 300-meter wide lava lake. So that's 900 feet, almost 1,000 feet wide lava lake. It's insane. It's a lake of boiling lava inside this crater. It's very foreboding and very cinematic for sure. But there's a city right at the base of that volcano, which has been flooded with lava in the past. The lavas there are really, really runny and they move really fast. So they're really dangerous if there's an eruption. And the story that we got to tell there was of the scientists doing their work, trying to understand the volcano, what makes it tick, what might happen in a future eruption, what kind of risks there are, but also to shed a light on why that matters. And science for science sake is awesome. I'm a scientist, so of course I'm all about like, let's find this out just because we want to know, obviously. But there are more important reasons for just some of the things that we do. And a lot of our science, we're really far removed from that. Often in geology, we're really far removed from that human factor, but it always gets back there. And in this case, we could show there's this city, there are these people living on the volcano. The volcano controls the sort of life and death of the ecosystem around them. It provides a natural environment for certain species like mountain gorillas to thrive, and that's one of their the things that they protect and care about there, and it's a revenue source for the people. The geologic landscape there, the bigger, broader geologic landscape, creates mineral wealth in the region, which unfortunately has empowered and enriched not the people who live there, but outsiders who come in and exploit those people for that mineral wealth, and even for the wealth, for the gorillas that they have there. So these people are born into the situation where they're living on the side of a volcano, and they're trapped in a society where people from the outside come in and exploit everything that they have on their land. And they don't necessarily reap all of the benefits, but they have to deal with all of these dangers. So the volcanic eruptions, the outgassing of CO2. So CO2 can pond in depressions. So if you have a field that has a little bit of a dip in it, the CO2 just ekes out of the ground, and it's heavier than air, so it sits in these areas. And goats, your livestock, or your children that walk in that may be shorter, can be overcome by the CO2 and can asphyxiate. So they're living in that. Imagine walking down the street and having to worry if you're going to walk into a bubble of CO2 and asphyxiate. Like,
so let
it's
me
not
see, Kayla, if I understand well, you are a scientist. You study very in-depth parts of the petrology. When we look at your website and your publications, we find that you are doing experimental studies, and you're working on volatile elements. You go down to the specifics of carbonate-rich olivines and rocks saturated with apatite and marylite. And then you go and you travel and you study the stratigraphy of Inning-Bright eruptions in Italy. And all of these things, they are pure science. But you're telling me that to communicate well and properly, in order to be related with the CNN and BBC and New York Times, then you have to know also all those other elements that connect this in-depth study with the human side. But then, how do you do that? Do you have to study those connections? Do you have to dedicate a lot of time to understand where the people is living, how the people is exploiting the minerals that you're studying, how do they live, how they founded their cities? How much time do you dedicate to this? And then how do you merge these different elements?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting. I haven't really thought of it in that way, of like setting aside separate time to study that. I think for me, I have a natural interest in that. And so when I'm surrounded by it, I can't help but see it. I can't help but talk to people and learn about the history, about why. I'm fascinated by why people are the way they are, if that makes sense. Like, why are cultures this way? Why is their culture that way and mine isn't this way? Like, what history led to that? So I'm always looking for that sort of a thing. So for me, it's, I think, inevitable that I would see these stories. But I do spend time, and like I said, reading news articles and blogs about, basically reporting on these kinds of issues. If I'm like, oh, I'm going to travel to this country I've never been to, I'd like to learn a little more about it. It makes me realize, I've never thought about DR Congo or wherever, and I just naturally am interested to learn more. So I think that a lot of scientists have that spark. They always want to learn more about whatever they're doing. Engineers sometimes have that too, where they're like, how does this work? They're picking up this thing and taking it apart. I think that spirit sort of naturally helps you build those links. And, and also, this, not to say that that's the only way to tell scientific stories. It's the way that I find resonates with me. And I think it resonates with a lot of people, because,
And
again,
that's
just
what we're
seeing.
interested
the
We're
humanity.
interested in you. We are interested
Yeah.
in you, and we interview one person at a time. Talking about the same topic, I found out a very nice letter that you wrote in a science program called Curiosity Girls Science. So you
Oh yeah.
write and you dedicate a little bit of time writing a letter to young girls. You connect these dots that we were talking about, saying a good volcanologist should appreciate not only the science behind volcanoes, but also the way that volcanoes interact with people, plants, animals, and even other rocks of our planet. So I thought that was fascinating. In a nutshell, it summarized what you just expressed. But then later on, you continue saying another very important point is learning how to ask the right question takes years to practice. I would like to ask you what has been your path in your learning on how to ask the right question.
Yeah, I'm still on that path for sure. I think it's a never-ending journey. I think a lot of students struggle with this. I did when I was a grad student because that's a particular time when there's this light shine on the fact that by the end of when you get your PhD, you're supposed to be able to go out into the world and formulate your own scientific questions and write grants, and you've never done that before, and it's scary. Up until that point, you've probably helped develop projects, but you've been handed the beginnings of a project, and you've had someone to hold your hand along the way, or at least that's the idea of grad school. And so it's scary. And so I think that's when I got thinking about that. And I talked to a lot of students about this, they say, I don't know how to make my own project. Like, I know what I'm interested in, and this is fun and it's exciting, but, and I think it's just this idea of building this big question is so scary, when in reality, they've been doing it all along, and you've been doing it your whole life. You just don't realize it. It's learning to take that skill and make it bigger and bigger. So, for example, if you're working on a project, or let's just say you're browsing the internet about something that you're interested in, you want to learn more about, I don't know, bunnies or some strain of diseases or a certain kind of plant and whatever, you know what I mean? You're researching something, and you say, oh, I wonder about this. And you Google a second thing. You've just asked your own question. So we do this every day throughout our lives as we're learning, or I wonder what's around that corner. I'm going to check it out. I'm taking a hike. What's down that path or that path? I'm going to go down that path. I think the skill comes in learning how to take that and apply it to a big picture that is connected to a lot of things, like in a certain field. So in science, one of the biggest hurdles to doing that was in understanding what was in the literature. So what has been done, what has been written about, what has been thought about by scientists before me. And when you're young, you just haven't had time to be exposed to all of that. And that goes for any field, not just science. Maybe you're a mechanic and you're like, well, I don't know how to, here's my 50-year-old colleague who's been doing this for 30 years and he's so good, like I'll never get to that level. He knows how to like invent these new tricks to fix this car. But you will get there. He just has 30 years of experience on you. He's just been practicing for 30 years more than you. And you haven't had time to they say in science, we stand on the shoulders of giants, meaning we're doing this small little thing. And the only reason we've gotten to this place that we can ask this question is because of all those thousands and millions of people before us who have asked other questions. But when you're young, you just haven't had the time to learn about all those questions that have already been asked. And once you start seeing those, then they sort of form this network in your brain, and you think, oh, here's the little hole that hasn't been answered yet. All this other stuff has been answered about this topic, but not this little thing. I want to know what that little thing is.
And Kayla, what is next? What do you think about yourself in this specific path of your web and your labyrinth of activities?
Well, in terms of the media stuff, for sure, I love doing documentaries. It's been a real pleasure, a real joy.
What would be your role in doing documentaries?
So being Well, I would love that to grow. So right now I usually come in, the one in the DR Congo was the one I was most involved with. I was one of the main hosts and I was there for several weeks. Other times I'll come in for one day and shoot a segment. But I'd love to continue doing that, being a host or showing off science in some place or another. I'd love to also get to the point where I'm able to work with producers to create a show. There are a number of things that don't get shown. So one of the things I'm trying to sell, which is I think a tough sell for people in the movie business, is that they always want to do shows in the field. I think they like that I'm a field geologist because we can go to beautiful places, they can get their drone shots, they can do all this, tick the boxes of like show beautiful scenery, blah, blah, blah. And show like badass person in the field with a rock camera. Cool, that's great. But I am pitching this idea of like doing a show completely in the laboratory, because that can be, and people joke like, oh, what's so scary, you're going to drop a beaker or something, but actually it can be quite exciting, just as exciting as being in the field. And it would take longer to shoot, but
yeah, I see it, because it's in a way we could do an analogy with what happened with kitchens and chefs. The chefs
exactly.
that until a couple of decades ago, they were seen as a very humble profession, and the parents, they didn't really like their sons to study to be that professions. And all of a sudden the TV changed the perception of that profession, exactly
Yeah.
because they shot and they record videos in the kitchen, which is nothing else than a lab.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It's like a cooking show, but less of the, daytime cooking show and more of the, fast-paced, exciting, like running a kitchen show, like running a lab and running all these experiments and thinking about the science. And it would take a long time, but it
And
would be a cool
Kayla,
show.
so that is the medium that you would use, the one that you describe, or you would like to be a protagonist. But what's the reason behind it? Why do you embrace this kind of outreach? What is burning inside you?
I think because I see the impact that it has. I feel like I do have things to say, and it's a great way to say those things. I'm comfortable. A lot of people aren't comfortable on video at all, and that's fine. But I'm very comfortable on a stage or on a, in front of the camera, and so I think it's a place where I can feel comfortable and open up and talk. And get the message out that I want to get out. So that it works for me. So that's one of the reasons I like it. But also because I see, just in general doing outreach, I see people reacting to it.
But what
I
is
think that's what
this
drives me.
message that you're thinking about?
Um,
I think, is it just information? Is it awareness?
it's, I think passion is the number one thing, is because people see your passion and they're inspired, and that level of inspiration can vary. So it can be someone says, oh wow, I see this woman and maybe she looks like me and makes me want to go and do science. Awesome. Or it could be like, wow, she's really passionate about this. It must be, it must be important. Now I just have this little place in my brain that says there's some important, interesting stuff related to geology. Even if that's unconsciously, even that's enough. We want to like get into the zeitgeist, get this idea into people's minds that science matters, seeking out truths matters, working with people in other places matters, understanding people who don't look like you or who don't live near you matters. And just even if it's unconscious, that little thing in their brain, that stored memory of having seen me or someone else say these things passionately. Next time maybe there's a bill on the Senate floor having to do with funding for science, maybe they're just that much more likely to push it through.
It seems that in order to do that, you're almost going to be seen like a role model, which brings a lot of responsibilities too, because whatever you do is going to be seen and scrutinized. Even private things that nowadays they go on the internet and they fly around, even if you don't know. So how do you take care about this aspect of your exposure to media and to social networks. So how do you take care about your public image?
That's a really good question, and it's something I think about a lot. There are a lot more things I would post and say on social media if I didn't feel that I had that role. So I think it's important to be aware. And I think you don't have to be on TV to be a role model. You just have to be a person. You might not even realize it. So I think everyone should take care when they're on Twitter, even if there's something they're really passionate about. If it's a charged issue, sometimes it's important to speak up, of course, and we're seeing that happening right now, for example, with the Black Lives Matter movement. But be sure that your voice, I guess, needs to be heard. I'm not going around, for example, and posting a lot of things about my perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement because I'm not Black. Instead, I'm trying to take the time to educate myself and retweet and promote the voices of African Americans and Black people around the world. So it's just that I actually take cues from certain people that I watch. One of them is Barack Obama. He does a very good job of speaking only when he needs to and when he thinks his voice will be helpful. So since he's left the presidency, he's been largely silent about a lot of things that are going on in the world, except for at crucial periods. He'll send a tweet or he'll have a town hall or he'll write an article. But I think it shows that he's taken time to ruminate on those issues and make sure that what he's saying isn't just, oh, I'm upset, knee-jerk reaction. I find that there's so much discourse in the world. Like there's so many people yelling and talking all the time on social media, and I don't want to be just some other rando. Who cares what I think about this or that? In some cases. So I'm very careful, and I'm always very careful to have that just perspective in general in life. I always try to say, okay, you're upset about this, or you're impassioned about this, or you're delighted about this. Stop and think about if there's another angle to this. It's not, most issues aren't black and white. So even if it's something I'm like, wow, this is fantastic, it's like, wait, stop and think about this. Does someone else have a negative view of this? Is it harming them in one way or another, or just challenging their beliefs even? And just taking a sensitive approach to that sort of thing. I think it's important to do that, like you said, if when you're a role model, which I think more people are than they realize.
Yeah, it seems that now with the social networks and including Wikipedia, because I see that you have a Wikipedia page that somebody's taking care of. Is yourself that you're taking care of your Wikipedia page?
I'm not, and I'm not even allowed to, because there's some things on there that are like outdated, and I've tried to update them, and Wikipedia rejects it because by the Wikipedia rules, you're not allowed to edit your own page.
Oh, okay,
you're not even allowed to create your own page. Someone else has to create it for you.
It makes sense. Okay. Yeah. But I understand that at some point you have kind of a public life in an official life that is seen and that you have to take care of.
But the voice in my head before I post anything online is I don't post anything that I would be uncomfortable with being on the front page of the newspaper. So if it's too personal or too inflammatory,
it depends
I don't want
also,
my name linked to
right?
that.
Because I hear also that bad publicity is publicity.
It's true. I'm not looking for any bad publicity. I'm not starved for publicity. I'm not a business selling my wares. So
yeah, I know. It depends on the strategy. At some point, if you have something very, very important to say, even bad publicity is okay in order to reach those unknown places that would never reach if you didn't have bad publicity. Simply because, and you would know better than me, the audience seems to like fights and right? Is that
drama?
Right? Drama.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Sev Shatska last week from the SETI Institute, and he also had a podcast with hundreds of thousands of listeners. And he told me that at some point they have to need for the conflict. The conflict is what detonates the interest.
It's so interesting that you say that, even with that specific word, conflict, because it's something that we talk about with relation to Star Trek a lot. So I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, but the ideals that Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, his ideal was in the future, the world will be perfect. No one will be hungry. No one will be sad. No, everyone will be happy and work together, and there's no money and there's no war and blah, blah, blah. And like, it's wonderful, right? No one's ever sad again, but it gets to the point of ridiculousness. And there was a shift that happened. So Star Trek, The Next Generation, generally the first couple seasons are considered to be some of the weakest. And that was when Gene Roddenberry had the strongest influence over them. By the third season, they say, I don't know if you've ever heard someone say that a show has either jumped the shark or grown a beard. So those are two phrases to say when a show has gone bad. Jumped the shark is a phrase referring to the Happy Days episode where the Fonz uses a jet ski to jump over sharks. That's when that show got weird. And grows a beard is when a show gets good. And that's referring to Commander Riker in Star Trek The Next Generation, who in season 3 grows a beard, and that's when the show gets good. And a lot of people attribute that to new writers coming in, who then expanded this in the next series, Deep Space Nine, where Gene Roddenberry wanted no conflict between people on the Enterprise, on the ship. He wanted all the conflict to be external. And the writers found that very difficult. It's like they're putting them in a corner. They're like, we can't write a show that has drama without conflict. And so the show really got good when there became this balance between this idealistic future and enough conflict to make things interesting. Because you can still resolve that conflict in a peaceful and wonderful way, but you can't remove conflict from humanity. That's a part of human nature, and showing that and showing how we can resolve that became a more powerful message.
It is. I remember a passage of one of the most intelligent writers in history, Goethe, who says that we have to learn also to hate. Hate is part of the human behavior, and you have to hate the ugly things. We don't have to be taught not to hate. You have to hate the things that are ugly and bad.
Yeah, and those don't have to be people. They can be ideas.
Yes, yes. So you said at the very beginning, Kayla, that what intrigues you is that you want to know people. And you're asking yourself when you're talking with a person why you are the way you are.
Yeah.
So let me be here your mirror and asking you some questions to better understand who you are. So, Kylas, first of all, what is the most important part of your education? Education to core, so not necessarily sensu stricto.
Probably, this is going to sound like a circular answer, but I think it's honestly getting to know people. So I did my PhD in the UK, and I'm from the United States, obviously. I did my PhD in the UK and traveled quite a bit around Europe. I lived in Italy for a little while, France for a little while, and traveled to places in Asia, South America, all over the world. That has been, I think, the defining element of what my perspective is on the world. I grew so much as a person, meeting with and working with and living with people from all different walks of life, that it opened my eyes to different opinions, different cultures, different way of doing things. And it's more than it's I want people to go read about these and watch them too, but I think there's something more. I mean, you must know this, like putting yourself in another culture, and you see things that they don't even see about themselves, and it makes you learn things about yourself. So yeah, I hope that's not too circular of an answer. It's always people, but really just connections with people, and using them as a mirror for myself and seeing, wow, this is who I am. This is who maybe I would rather be. In that's just, I think, had the most influence on who I am as a person, is traveling.
And talking about influence, which thinker has had the greatest influence in your life?
Like a philosopher?
You choose.
There's so many. It's hard to name just one. The first person that comes to mind is actually a guy who I'm now working with, His name is Gordon Moore, and he's an experimental petrologist. And we just by happenstance ended up sharing an office at NASA when we're allowed to go there. But he was my mentor when I was an undergrad. And he was a researcher at Arizona State University when I was going there for school for my geology bachelor's degree. And I started working with him in his laboratory. And he's one of those people who teaches you so much more than just the science and how to do it. We used to talk about, we had office spaces in the lab, so I would just wander into his office anytime and sit down and bother him and ask him stupid questions. And he would stop what he was doing and turn and take the time and talk to me and challenge me and listen to my ideas and treat me like a peer and give me the time of day. And we talked about everything from travel, wine. He had a vineyard in northern Arizona once, music, art, literature. And he's a very well-rounded person. So I learned like, oh, wow, that's who I want to be. I want to be this great scientist, but I also want to like read these books and understand classic literature and all these things that are like romanticized things, for me. I was like, oh, you can do all that. You can learn about all that. Like the world is like all of these pieces. And then if we're thinking about like the second person who comes to mind is only because there's a book on my bedside table that I still haven't finished, which is called, there's a couple of different translations. I'm trying to remember what the name of mine is. I think it's the way things are. And I think the other title is on the nature of things is the more popular title. And it's by a philosopher called Lucretius.
Oh, the Rerum Natura.
Yeah. The with the order of things or the nature of things. And he talks about, he basically talks about atoms and molecules and all of these things that now are basic fundamental tenets of science. And it's just really interesting to see what scientists used to be in that era.
I also like that book so much, and I always remember about those more than 500 pages, the description of the clinamen, which is this unexpected motion of something that changes and something that should have had a workflow, but all of a sudden it changes because of the clinamen.
I love it.
That is a very interesting and fundamental book, yes. And you, Kayla, that you are meeting so many people, what's the question you would most like ask to others?
I guess it depends on, where we are if I've just met them, the first things I'll usually ask about a person is about where they're from. It doesn't matter if they're from down the street from me or if they're from another country. Because like I said, I love this idea of like you are the way you are because of your history, because of how you've grown up and interacted with the world. So plus it's like you get to travel to this cool new place. She's like, what's it like where you grew up? And I was talking to a friend of mine not too long ago, and she's from a small town in Mexico. I was like, oh, do you get to go home often? She's like, oh yeah, every once in a while. I was like, what's it like? What's the weather like? Is there mountains there? What is your house like? Those are the questions I love. And people love talking about themselves too. So it's easy. It's a really great icebreaker if you just don't know what to talk about.
Kayla, I feel that you are suffering so much with the coronavirus and being relegated at home because you really like to move and travel and meet people, huh?
Yes. In fact, as soon as I'm energized now because I'm speaking to a new human. And as soon as we sat down, I also wanted to be like, where are you from? Because are you Italian, by the way?
Yes, of course.
Where in Italy are you from?
I'm from Udine, which is northeast of Venice, very close to the Dolomites.
Oh, beautiful. I've never been to the Dolomites, but it's just absolutely gorgeous in photos.
Oh, yes. You should go there.
My family are from not like far removed family, several generations back, are from the Potenza region. It's like South Central.
Basilicata.
Mm.
Yeah, fantastic area. One of the most remote areas of Italy where you don't even have trains reaching that part.
Exactly. It's why I've never been, because I wanted to go when I was living in Italy in the Marche region, but I was just like, and I had no money at the time. So even if I could find a way there, it's just like, it wasn't possible, but one day I'll get there.
Yes, you have to go there and see Matera, which is World Heritage protected by UNESCO. Is one of the oldest cities in the world, more than 10,000
Wow.
years old, with caves in the carbonate that you would like a lot, where the
Cool.
Bushmen they used to live there. Yes,
Wow. That's amazing.
it is. Kayla, what do you doubt most?
What do I doubt most? Oh my goodness. Um, well, right now, the most doubt I'm feeling is on our ability to change as a species. um, Not to get too topical, but it's hard, it's impossible to avoid being topical right now. The world is a crazy place, and we see all these calls for change and little things, statues coming down and things like that. But we've seen, movements like this in the past, and while this one does feel different, and I have hope, my biggest worry and doubt is whether or not we can actually affect real systematic change.
What
It's
is
hard.
your demon?
Oh gosh, too many. uh, I would, I guess the thing I'm struggling with right now is finding balance. My demon is balance, I think. I've never been a very balanced person. I do a lot because I want to do everything, and that's not always good for me. And it makes me suffer in other areas of my life. So that's something I'm always struggling for, is finding balance.
What illusion do you suffer from?
What illusion? Like about myself? Gosh, I don't. That's such a good question. I'm gonna have a better answer after, like in the middle of the night tonight. I'm gonna wake up and be like, oh, I
All
should have
right,
said this.
you can call me.
Um, okay. Well, like my biggest illusion about maybe that my biggest illusion is that is the idea of failure, I guess, or idea of measuring success. I'm always trying to reevaluate what success means, and I can tell myself that I'm successful in one way or another, but actually making myself believe it is another thing. So there's some imposter syndrome there.
What are you proud of?
I'm proud of my work. I'm
Which work?
proud all of it. I'm proud of all of it. I'm proud of my science. I think I've done careful, like slow, careful, methodical science. I'm proud of my communication work. I think it's been the things that I've had the privilege of working on, and a lot of that is luck being paired with the right people who, it's more than me that makes these documentaries. Obviously, I'm a small part of it, and I'm proud to have been a part of this, particularly that documentary in the DR Congo, called Expedition Volcano on the BBC, and it also aired on Nova, called Volatile Earth. I would actually recommend the BBC version more if you can find it. I'm proud to have been a part of that. I'm proud of the message that we could create and the wonderful humanistic vision that we could put forth.
So NASA, track movie, science outreach, where's your heart?
In the end, it's in the science. I have to be honest, which is why I told you I did a semester in film school. That was my little stint into the film business. I did a semester in film school, and the reason I left was because the reason I started film school was this idea of I want to go make Star Trek. I want to go make sci-fi. I love the science, but I love storytelling and film. I want to go do that. And I became a bit disheartened with the industry and how difficult it is to get into it, and also realized that I missed the science part. So it's like, hey, I could make Star Trek, or I could do Star Trek. And the thing that gets me going, that really keeps me up at night, is thinking about, oh, how could I do this differently in the lab? Oh, that's a good idea. Or I wake up in the middle of the night. One time I wrote an entire an abstract for a conference. I wrote the entire thing in my head in the middle of the night, and then I had to get up and write it. And it was one of my favorite abstracts that I've written. So that's really where my passion is, if I'm being honest with myself.
And where do you see your future? Do you see your future as a working in NASA, an editor, a writer, a filmmaker?
I see my future in science, definitely. My at least that's the trajectory that I'm on. I try to stay flexible because that's one of the things that I think keeps us from realizing how successful we are. We think we failed when our path changes, but that's not true. But right now, my goal, the current path I'm on, is to be the best scientist I can be, to write important papers, and the job I currently have, I absolutely adore. So yeah, right now, I don't like to plan more than a few years into the future, but right now, that's where I want to be.
Well, if you had to plan years down the road, what would you like to be the legacy that you leave behind?
I want my legacy to be creating things that are useful to other people, whether that be in science or in science communication or in the Star Trek stuff that I do. So, for example, one of the things I love doing in science, I love doing the fundamental research, but I also love creating tools for other people to use. That's one thing I'm really passionate about right now. So, creating, applications, code, methodologies that can be applied to a lot of things, because those are the kind of things that seem to stand the test of time, and inventing new strategies to do something is so powerful. So I want my legacy to be someone who was insightful, intelligent, and created these wonderful things to leave for others to use.
Any regrets so far?
Probably so many. Oh, it's I've done stupid things in my life that I regret doing, but mostly I just celebrate the path that I've taken, and yeah, that's it. I try not to dwell on regrets because it's impossible to know what would have been. So I honestly don't really think about regrets.
Do you ever think about death?
Yes, death scares the crap out of me. Other people dying scares me a lot. I I lost my brother a couple of years ago, and he was the first person close to me that I ever lost. And that
I'm
has
sorry, Kyla.
completely. Thank you, thank you. But it's okay, and I hope it's not too much of a downer that I bring that up, because I want to be able to talk about him, without it bringing down the conversation. I loved my brother; he was an amazing human, and but his death has completely changed my view of the entire world. And so yeah, death scares me a lot. And sometimes sometimes, okay, this is funny. Sometimes I think about my cat. I have a cat who's 17, and I love her very much. And she traveled to Europe with me and back, and she's been there. She's like my cat, And sometimes I would think about her dying and become so upset that I would just start bawling and have to call my husband, and he would have to like talk me down. And you could feel free to laugh. It's hilarious. Like, here's me, like a 32-year-old woman, just like bawling, like my cat's gonna die one day. And he would be like, Kayla, it's okay. She's very healthy right now. But yeah, no, death gets in my head. It's scary.
Kyla, what is the meaning of life?
Like, I have an answer that anyone cares about for that. If I have to give my thoughts on it, I guess it would just, I don't know. The answer is I don't know. And that's the journey, right? I don't know. I don't even know if I care about the meaning of life. Is there a meaning? Some people say the meaning is the journey that we're on to discover the meaning. But why should life be about discovering the meaning of life? I don't know. Doesn't really resonate with me. It's about just, I don't know, what's the meaning of life? Just live. It's the hardest thing to do. Just live.
Kyla, we still have a couple of minutes. Do you you have an open mic here to talk with the audience, listeners, and viewers? Go ahead, the mic is yours.
Awesome. Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, please, if you're interested in what I have to say, or you disagree with it, or you want to tell me about it, get in touch. You can find me, like I said, I'm very Googleable. Find me on Twitter at Kayla Kaylai. My DMs are open. Feel free to get in touch. I love chatting with people, and if I have the time, I will respond. Check out, if you're Trekkie or you just want to hear more of my soothing melodic voice, please check out the Shuttlepod podcast. It's a labor of love, and we have a good time doing it. And just be true to yourselves. That's my message.
Thank you, Kayla. Kayla Iacovino, petrologist working at Jacobs at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, among many other things. And thank you so much for all the suggestions, the tips you gave us for communication, and for allow us to understand you better, to see you inside. And this was really a pleasure to talk with you. I hope that the mini geology audience would appreciate that. So this was another episode of the mini geology show. You're gonna be able to see this episode in minigeology.com. And the viewers, they can write me at minigeology@gmail.com for the next guest to propose themselves as a next guest or to shoot a line for the next topic to develop. Thank you very much, Kyla. Thank you indeed.
Thank you so much, Daniel. This was really a pleasure.